What if the most important moment of your life didn't come with a warning? No signal, no sign from above, just a door swinging open, a stranger's voice saying, "Sit down and eat." And everything changing from that second forward. That's exactly what happened one cold autumn in the open lands of the American frontier. And by the time this story is over, you're going to understand something about kindness that most people take a lifetime to learn. Stay with me, because this one gets deep before it gets beautiful. The year was 1873. The land west of the Missouri River was still raw, still wild, still unforgiving in the way only open country can be, where the sky goes on forever, and the nearest neighbor might be 20 miles in any direction. Out there, a ranch wasn't just property, it was a declaration. A man or woman who built something on that land was saying, quietly, to the world, "I intend to survive." Caleb Harrow had been saying that for 11 years. His ranch sat at the edge of a long, flat valley in the Wyoming Territory. 340 acres of grass, creek water, and hard-earned fence posts. He ran cattle, raised horses, grew enough wheat to get through winter. He had a dog named Biscuit, a barn that needed painting, and a silence around him that people in town had long since stopped trying to fill. He was not a cold man. He was a careful one. There's a difference. Cold men close doors. Careful men just don't open them too fast. He'd been opening doors slowly ever since his wife, Mary, passed in the spring of 1869. 4 years gone, and the house still felt like hers. The curtains she'd sewn, the cast iron skillet she'd seasoned so perfectly, it almost cooked on its own. Caleb kept it all exactly the way she'd left it. Not out of grief exactly, but out of something quieter. Respect, maybe. Or just the particular loneliness of a man who learned to love a place through another person's eyes. He didn't talk about her much, but every morning before he poured his coffee, he'd look at the empty chair at the end of the table, and then he'd pour coffee for himself and get to work. Because that's what the land demands. Work. Every day. No exceptions. Now, before I go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been so broken that you stopped asking for help? Not because you were proud, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped believing help was something that could reach you? Hold that thought. It matters more than you know. Her name was Ada Reeves, and when she walked through the gate of Caleb Harrow's ranch on an October morning in 1873, she had nothing. Not almost nothing. Nothing. No horse, no bag worth mentioning, a coat that had given up keeping the cold out somewhere around 50 miles back, boots that had split at the sole and been tied back together with what looked like strips of old leather harness. She was 27 years old, and she looked like someone who had already lived 2 full lives and been discarded by both. Ada had come from a small settlement 3 days east. She'd been living there with her husband, a man named Douglas Reeves, who had spent most of their marriage promising things he never delivered and taking things he never replaced. When the settlement's one-room building that passed for a trading post burned down in a fire, an accident, the men said, though the fire had started in a very convenient location for Douglas's debts. What little Ada had left went with it. Douglas did not wait around for her. She'd heard there was work in the valley, a ranch, an honest man. That's all she had. A rumor, a direction, and the stubborn insistence of her own feet to keep moving. When she pushed open the gate, Caleb was hauling water from the well to the horse trough. He saw her before she saw him clearly. This woman, slight but upright, jaw set in a way that said she wasn't going to ask for pity, even if pity was all that was available. He set down the bucket. He looked at her boots. He looked at her coat. He said, "Sit down and eat." Not, "Can I help you?" Not, "What are you doing here?" Not, "Who are you? Just sit down and eat." And that was it. That was the whole thing. 5 words that cracked open a door that neither of them would ever close again. Now here's what I want you to notice. And drop a comment if you've ever seen this kind of thing happen in real life, because I know some of you have. The most powerful offers of help are never the ones wrapped in ceremony. They're the quiet ones, the matter-of-fact ones, the ones that don't make you feel small for needing. Caleb didn't ask Ada what happened. He didn't make her explain herself at the door like she was applying for something. He just brought her inside, to a kitchen that still smelled like Mary's dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, and he put a bowl of beans and cornbread in front of her, and a tin cup of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Ada sat. She ate. She didn't cry. That came later. For now, she just ate, and Caleb sat across from her and said nothing, which was perhaps the kindest thing of all, because sometimes a person who has been through the kind of thing she'd been through doesn't need words. They need someone to sit in the same room and not make everything worse. When the bowl was empty, she looked up at him. Blue-gray eyes, the color of the sky just before a storm makes up its mind. "I can work," she said. "I can cook, and I can clean, and I know cattle some. I don't need charity." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "Didn't offer charity," he said. "Offered food. Work's a different conversation." She blinked. "All right. I got a room in the back of the house. Used to be storage. It's clean. You can have it." "For how long?" He picked up his coffee cup. "Long as you need it." She stayed 3 nights, then a week. Then the week became something without a name. Ada worked. Lord, did she work? She was up before Caleb most mornings, had the fire going and the coffee on before the sun cleared the ridge. She mended the fence along the south pasture, a job Caleb had been putting off for a month because he hated fence mending, and she'd done it like it was nothing. She had a way with the horses that surprised him. They'd go still when she walked into the stall. Not the still of fear, the still of recognition, like they could sense something steady in her. And she could cook, not in the way Caleb had learned to cook, which was fuel. Everything made to sustain you, and nothing more. Ada cooked like the food was part of something larger, like sitting down to a meal was supposed to mean something. The first time she made a proper supper, salt pork, roasted sweet potatoes, gravy that had no business being as good as it was, Caleb sat down at that table and didn't speak for a long time. "You all right?" Ada asked from across the table. "Yeah," he said. "Just been a while since supper smelled like this." She didn't ask what he meant. She understood. If you're enjoying this story, this is a great time to hit that subscribe button, because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories that come from the heart of American history and the people who lived it quietly, bravely, without anyone writing it down. Don't miss the next one. By November, the rhythm of the ranch had changed. Not loudly, gradually, the way the light changes in autumn. You don't notice it happening. And then one day, you realize it's already happened. Caleb started explaining things to Ada that he'd never explained to anyone. Not because she asked, but because she listened. The way the creek ran low in the 3rd week of October every year, and what it meant for the cattle. The particular look of the sky before a bad storm. Which horses could be trusted, and which ones were liars. Ada listened to all of it, and she asked sharp questions, the kind that told him she was actually thinking, not just politely waiting for him to finish. And Caleb, who had not laughed easily in 4 years, found himself laughing more than he expected. Not at big things, at small things. The way Biscuit the dog was completely committed to the delusion that he was useful. The particular absurdity of a fence post that had been put in slightly wrong and refused all attempts at correction. Small things. The things that only the people who share a place begin to notice together. There's something that happens when two careful people start to trust each other. It's not fast, it's not dramatic, but it's undeniable. Like water finding its way through rock. Not crashing through, just finding the path that was always there. Tell me something in the comments. Have you ever found yourself trusting someone before you'd made the conscious decision to? Because that's what was happening here, and neither of them had a name for it yet. December came hard. A blizzard rolled in from the north on a Wednesday night, dropped 2 feet of snow in 18 hours, and sealed the ranch in silence for 5 days. Those 5 days changed things. They were stuck together, Caleb and Ada and Biscuit, in a house that suddenly felt smaller and warmer in a way that had nothing to do with the stove. They played cards. They read. Caleb had a small collection of books he'd never told anyone about, including a battered copy of Shakespeare's collected works that he'd carried west and never admitted to anyone. Ada laughed when she found it. A rancher who reads Shakespeare, she said. A woman who tied her boots together with harness leather, he replied. We're both full of surprises, she laughed, and it was the first time he'd heard her laugh fully. Not the polite, careful version she'd been offering since October, but the real one. The one that came from somewhere deeper. That night, when the wind was still howling and the fire was low, Ada told him about Douglas. Not all of it. Just enough. The way you tell a person things when you've decided they can hold them safely. Caleb listened without speaking, without changing his expression, without offering advice or commentary or the particular brand of male problem-solving that would have made everything worse. When she finished, he said, "He doesn't deserve to be the last thing you decided about yourself." She looked at him. "I mean," he said, "whatever you think you are now because of what he did to you, that's his version, not yours." Ada was quiet for a long time. The fire snapped. "That's the most words you've said in one go since I got here," she finally said. Caleb almost smiled. "Don't get used to it." But something had shifted. Both of them felt it. By January, the ranch hands who came out from town for seasonal work began to notice something they couldn't quite put language to. The place felt different. Not just cleaner or better organized, though it was both those things. It felt inhabited, like someone had taken up residence not just in the walls, but in the actual air of the place. One of the hands, an older man named Silas, who'd worked the territory for 30 years and had opinions about everything, pulled Caleb aside one afternoon by the barn. "She's staying?" Silas asked. Caleb kept his eyes on the fence line. "She's working." "That's not what I asked." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mind your fence posts, Silas." Silas grinned into his mustache and said nothing else. But that was the question, wasn't it? Was she staying? And the honest answer, the one Caleb hadn't said out loud to anyone, hadn't even properly admitted to himself, was that the thought of her not staying had started to feel like the thought of a cold house, like something he'd already decided he didn't want to go back to. Spring came the way Wyoming springs always do, fast and sudden and almost apologetic, like the land is making up for what winter cost you. The grass came back green, the creek rose, the horses got restless in the good way, and Ada Reeves was still there, 340 acres into her new life, mending the fence along the south pasture for the second season in a row. Caleb came to find her on a morning in late April when the air smelled like mud and new grass and something almost like possibility. He had coffee, 2 cups. He handed her one. She took it. They stood at the fence line and looked out at the valley. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right." He was quiet for a moment. Caleb Harrow was a man who chose words the way he chose tools, deliberately, because the wrong one makes the job harder. "I don't want you to be working here," he said. "I want you to be here." Ada looked at him. "There's a difference," she said. Because she was the kind of woman who made you say the whole thing.
I recognize you.
Yeah, he said. There is. She looked back out at the valley. The creek was catching the morning light the way it did sometimes, throwing small pieces of sun into the air. You're a careful man, Caleb Harrow. I am. I've known men who called themselves careful, who just meant they were afraid. I know, he said. I've been afraid. I don't think that's what this is. She held the coffee cup in both hands. She thought about Douglas, who had promised her the world and spent their whole marriage making the world smaller. She thought about the 3 days she'd walked to get here, the boots tied together with harness leather, the gate, the words, sit down and eat. She thought about 5 words that had changed everything. I'm not easy, she said. I need you to know that. I'm not looking for easy, he said. I had easy. Easy bores me. She almost smiled. Then she did smile, and it was the real one, the one from somewhere deeper. All right then, Ada Reeves said. I'll stay. And that, in the Wyoming Territory in the spring of 1874, was that. They were married in June, in the small white church at the edge of town, in a ceremony that lasted 32 minutes and was attended by 14 people, including Silas, who cried into his mustache and denied it to his dying day. Caleb wore a jacket he'd had made in town. Ada wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric she'd ordered from a catalog, pale green, the color of the valley in the morning. She carried a small bunch of wildflowers she'd picked from the south pasture, the same pasture where she'd mended the fence, the same pasture where she'd stood the morning she arrived and decided she wasn't going to ask for pity. The pastor asked if they had words for each other. In those days, most people didn't, beyond the standard vows. But Ada looked at Caleb and said, "You gave me a meal when I had nothing. You never asked me to be grateful for it. I've been thinking about that for 8 months, and I think I finally understand what it means. It means you saw me as a person before you knew a single thing about me. That's the rarest thing I've ever been given." There was a long silence in the church. Caleb cleared his throat. He was not a man given to speeches, but he looked at Ada. This woman who'd walked 20 miles to change her life, who'd tied her boots together with harness leather, who laughed with the horses and mended fences and read his Shakespeare without making him feel exposed. And he said, "I've been keeping this place going for 11 years. I thought I was doing it for myself. Turns out I was just waiting for someone to keep it with." Silas cried harder. He denied that too. The ranch became something else after that. Not bigger, necessarily. Deeper. Ada brought in chickens and a kitchen garden that turned the soil near the house into something productive and almost beautiful. She started teaching reading to the children of the hired hands on Sunday afternoons, using Caleb's Shakespeare and whatever else she could order from back east. Caleb expanded the horse breeding operation, something he'd always thought about, but never had the bandwidth to pursue alone. Ada had opinions about which horses to breed and which to sell, and her instincts were right more often than not, which he admitted to her directly and told no one else. By 1878, the Harrow Ranch was one of the 30 largest cattle operations in the Wyoming Territory, not because of some dramatic gamble or stroke of luck, because of 2 people who showed up, one to the land, one to a gate, and decided to build something that lasted. They had 2 children, a son, James, born in 1876, a daughter, Clara, born in 1878. Clara would go on to become the first woman to own a ranch outright under her own name in that county. James would raise horses until he was 73 years old and swear there was no better life. Neither child ever heard their parents fight in a way that wasn't settled by the time the sun went down. Neither child ever went to bed uncertain that they were loved. Ada lived to 81, Caleb to 79. He went first in the spring, the way he'd come into everything, quietly, without drama, on his own terms. They found him in the barn, sitting against the old post where he'd always hung his hat. Peaceful. Like he'd just decided he was done and sat down somewhere comfortable to wait. Ada planted wildflowers along the south pasture fence that year. Pale ones, the color of her wedding dress. She said to Clara some months later, "Your father gave me 5 words once that saved my life. Not because the words were magic, because behind them was someone who meant them completely." Clara asked what the 5 words were. Ada smiled, the real smile, the one from somewhere deep. "Sit down and eat," she said. "This is the kind of story that doesn't get written down often enough. The ones that happen without witnesses, without fanfare. The ones built from coffee handed across a table, from fence posts, from blizzards, and Shakespeare, and a dog named Biscuit, who was not nearly as useful as he believed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something real, something you've seen in someone you love, leave a comment below. Tell me about a moment when someone's simple kindness changed the direction of your life. I read every single one of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. Every week there are stories like this one. Stories from the frontier, from the places where history happened quietly, in the ordinary moments between the famous ones. Hit subscribe and make sure you don't miss what's coming next. This video is an artistic reconstruction created with artificial intelligence, developed independently and exclusively for the purpose of entertainment and the sharing of human values. The characters, events, locations, and situations depicted are fictional and the product of creative storytelling. They do not represent historical records or documented events. For verified historical information about life in the American frontier, please consult academic sources and official historical archives.